Hello and welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Morantz-Cohen, speaking to you from the university's Picture Gallery. Today our guest is political cartoonist Tony Auth. Mr. Auth has been an editorial cartoonist at the Philadelphia Inquirer since 1971 and is a member of the paper's editorial board. He's the winner of numerous awards for his work, including a Pulitzer Prize. Tony Auth, welcome to the Drexel interview.
Thank you very much.
Well, I read that you had, at a young age, you were bedridden for a period.
That's true.
And I find that, in my reading, that it seems to be the case for a number of artists and also writers, that they went through a stage at an early age when they were confined to their bed, and that somehow sparked them creatively. Do you think that was true for you?
It's amazing how common that is among cartoonists that I know. And I remember very clearly, I had rheumatic fever, and so I was bedridden for a year and a half at the age of 5. And my mother came in one day and she said, you know, you really ought to learn how to draw. And fortuitously, this was what is called now the golden age of radio, which really was a golden age. And there were dramas and comedies and fantasies and children's programming. And I would listen to these shows, which were extremely stimulating to the imagination, and then try and illustrate the radio shows as I learned to draw.
Interesting. So it was radio. You didn't have a visual medium. You had the radio.
Well, no, I also had the visual medium of children's books, and comic strips, which often illustrated those same shows, especially the children's programming, Superman, Batman, The Lone Ranger, etc. And so, yes, I did have a visual component to that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the comic books. You were a great comic book fan.
I was.
And the old standards then, Batman, Superman.
Right.
Those were your inspirations.
Yes, they were.
Is that what you intended to do originally?
All I knew very early on was that I wanted to draw, and where that might lead, I didn't know. And I tried on sort of various fantasies about occupations as I heard about them, and then I didn't discover really political cartooning until I was in college.
Okay. In college, though, you started out doing biological illustration?
Well, I have a double major of art and zoology.
Okay.
And the reason I did that was because, again, I wanted to draw, and I knew by then I wasn't a painter, I wasn't a designer. I didn't want to go into advertising, which even at the age of 18 struck me as being involved in the search for the ultimate lie. And so somebody said, well, what about medical illustration? And I thought, well, that will be useful and enjoyable, and I enjoy science still, so that's what my major was.
And for a while, you worked as a medical illustrator for a hospital.
I did.
And at what point did you start doing political cartooning?
Well, I had done cartoons when I was in college for the school newspaper. I went to UCLA, and they were not political. But shortly after I graduated, I was approached by some former UCLA newspaper people who I had known who were starting their own little weekly anti-war paper. This was the height of Vietnam we're talking about. And they asked me if I would be their political cartoonist, and I said, well, I'll give it a try. And so I did one cartoon a week for a year, and then was madly in love with this and wanted desperately to find a job on a big city newspaper so that I could get paid to do what was now by this time I was doing 3 cartoons a week in my spare time. And, you know, one thing led to another, and I finally ended up at the Inquirer.
So you knew as soon as you started doing political cartooning that was your vocation?
Yes.
And this was at a time of great ferment.
Well, that's the thing. It was for those who didn't live through it, it was an amazing time, artistically, musically, politically. It was also a time of great division parents not speaking to their children, demonstrations and counter-demonstrations where crowds could get extremely ugly, and that was all a measure of the passion of the moment and, you know, how strongly people felt about that conflict and about those who represented each side in it.
Do you think your political cartooning politicized you, or do you think being a political person made you into a political cartoonist?
The latter.
The latter?
Yeah.
So you
Because
already had strong convictions?
No. Well, no, I didn't politically. I had to learn. I wasn't political. I just started reading and getting caught up in the moment and talking. It was a time when everybody who I knew was extremely interested in politics. So it was a very natural thing to, and you know, there were a lot of journals and magazines at the time that were quite influential. Ramparts, The Nation, The New Republic.
Your title is editorial cartoonist for the
Right.
Philadelphia Inquirer. I wonder if you tell us what that means. Does that mean that you reflect an editorial position?
No, no. My work is signed work. It represents my opinion and not the newspaper's
So it never
opinion.
reflects the newspaper's position?
Well, it does if our positions are similar.
Okay, that's true. But in no way are you
No,
asked to do anything?
I'm not
Yeah.
expected to. Although that's not true at newspapers generally. I think there are many newspapers in this country where the editorial cartoonist is expected to read that morning's lead editorial and then contrive a cartoon which mirrors it.
But you have freedom to
Yes.
do what you please. But the editorial part then is your own editorial position is reflected in the cartoon. Is that what it means? And it will be on the editorial page. Is that
Well,
correct?
editorial cartoon simply means that it's a way of describing a political cartoon. That's what we're talking about. It's a cartoon that generally speaking is political, not always, but it appears on the editorial page, which is where that nomenclature comes from.
Okay. And so it has a perspective. It has a position, generally.
Best, yes.
Or sometimes that may not be
Well,
clear.
I mean, no. Well, some cartoons are ambiguous, and some are ephemeral, and all of them have a half-life. So that a cartoon with a very long half-life is maybe timeless. The half-life, I'm afraid, is over by the time it appears in the paper.
Okay.
So, you know
Do you
what I
think
mean?
about that as you're
Oh,
drawing?
sure.
You're thinking, oh, this is one that's very topical. This is one that will really may last. It may have legs.
Yes, but the primary responsibility is just to do the best work you can for the next day's newspaper.
Okay. And what inspires you? How do you get started?
Well, I read 3 newspapers a day. I listen to NPR. I read the New York Review of Books and the New Yorker, and I read books.
Sounds like quite a
And
regimen.
I talk to people.
And that gives you enough fodder.
Yeah.
How many do you do a week?
I do 1 a day,
Okay.
so it's usually 5 a week, unless I'm off for one reason or another.
Okay. That's quite a
Lot. It's a pretty grueling. Well, it feels like a treadmill in a way, except that the pace is just about right. I never know what I'm going to do in the morning. You're accomplished whatever you're able to accomplish by the end of the day, and then you start the process over. I'm also involved in children's books, and the contrast with the book publishing industry is incredible.
Okay, well, before we get to the children's books, I want to look at some of your cartoons
Okay.
and have you comment. This one is an older cartoon,
Right.
and I assume it's poking fun at prayer in the schools.
Well, you know, I was thinking about, I forget when this was, in the 80s, I think there was a great argument in this country about whether we should allow prayer in the schools, and in thinking about this, I realized that there are many prayers going on in the schools, and practically speaking, there's probably more prayer going on in our schools than any other institution. And so,
but not necessarily the kind of prayer that was.
well, they're prayers.
They are real
I
prayers.
went back into my own past, and I, got some of those prayers out, and I just illustrated them.
Yeah, dear God, please, God, let it be 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right. This one too. I mean, looking at these first few cartoons, I mean, you're looking back perhaps to your own adolescence, or perhaps you had an adolescent at the point you were making these?
Well, this one, I think the issue that stimulated this was something about our educational system. And the contrast here, of course, is between a developed body and a developed brain.
Having myself two kids now past the 5th grade, but nonetheless who had both visited orthopedic surgeons because of problems with backpacks and back pain, I found this one particularly apropos.
Well, that's my 5th grader at the time. She's now in college. But,
yeah, mine is too. So, but yeah,
but yeah, I used to be astounded at this pack of
20
books.
to 30 pound
easily,
pack.
Easily.
Yeah, there are 3 here that are Philadelphia cartoons. Specifically, and what inspired this?
Well, this one's about Philadelphia's problem with guns and gun violence, and the unwillingness of Harrisburg to take seriously Philadelphia's attempts to deal with this problem. You know, what makes it a cartoon is the twist here involving the use of circles, a happy face in the case of Harrisburg and a target in the case of Philadelphia. A cartoon has to have some sort of twist that makes it a cartoon, or else it's a drawing. Now, there's nothing wrong with drawings, but that's, to me, the central thing.
What is a twist? I mean, the twist is that it's witty, clever, funny.
You can't define it.
You can't define it.
Yeah, I can tell you what it is in any particular drawing.
What here in this cartoon, what strikes me, I mean, you're right, the smiley face, and then this, target. The smiley face connects for me to the innocence and the possible, you know, the lack of drama going on in Harrisburg also in terms of the kind of lifestyle there.
Well, that's interesting, because to me a smiley face just means stupid. Mindless.
Well, yeah, all right, but nothing's going on. I mean, is that stupid or mindless? It's just...
Well, lights on, nobody home.
Okay. But one of the reasons why Harrisburg isn't thinking about Philadelphia is that it's in its own little cocoon.
Well, this is great
face.
because it's actually a good thing that you can interpret these things in a variety of ways and have a conversation about them, which is, I understand, what happens in a lot of schools where the teachers use these drawings. And you get, I mean, I'm not wedded to any particular...
Right, right. No, I think this would be a very good one to talk about in maybe an inner city public school and see what they have to say and what they think about the smiley
or
face.
Or a suburban school.
Or a suburban
rural
school, which might see itself more like Harrisburg and not see the smiley face in a negative way necessarily. This just from the point of view of dramatic graphics. How did you come up with that? Just came to you.
Oh, no. I wish. No, you know, it's a matter of free association, either verbally or graphically, and until you come up with something that meets your definition of a cartoon and expresses what it is you're trying to say.
Well, did the idea, I mean, my thought would be you just would look at the skyline, it would come to you. Well, or were you thinking about making a cartoon on this subject and then you thought of it this way?
I started with the subject.
Okay.
But it's interesting because you say it looks like it just came to me. It has to look that way, or else it's not successful. A cartoon that looks like work is not going to be rewarding, and it's just going to put people off. It has to look spontaneous and effortless. And in fact, the guy who preceded me at the Inquirer, when I came back here and was about to start this job, he said, your goal, you should go to a coffee shop and you should read newspapers and start doing drawings on napkins and talking to intellectuals who pass by. And at noon or thereabouts, a copy boy from the paper should pick up one of the napkins and print that in the next day's paper. That's what it should look like. Oh. It should look energetic.
So you've always kept that in mind?
Oh, sure.
So it should look effortless, but
unforgettable.
it's not effortless.
Well,
it takes a
yeah.
lot